Have you ever tried to talk your friend out of doing something ridiculously stupid? Like you just know what they choose is going to go sideways. Like the peaceful planet begins to tilt on a different axis. Streaks of fire paint the sky from things falling out of geosynchronous orbit. Tsunamis hammering the coast. The earth quakes, kind of sideways. Meanwhile, the friend to whom all of this is happening decides to run headlong toward the waves about to bear down on them. You try to talk them out of their madness, to see reason, but to no avail. They willingly choose disaster. Okay, well, as you can imagine, seeing Aniyah again wasn't something that Javius was really counting on. Well, at least that's my perspective, especially now considering his actions after the fact. So after we saw that she had come into the bar, we tried to get him out of there as quickly as possible before she noticed that we were there. But things never really work out that way, and she immediately came over after she noticed him. She gave Javius the biggest hug, and you could just tell these were two people who knew enough of one another to immediately jump into that perfect flow of conversation. You know that type of conversation I'm talking about, that rhythm when he tells a joke about her moving to a new state, leaving all the old people behind, meaning him, and she laughs and cracks that smile that absolves sins and retorts with, "It's not that far, but I love it there. If you ever come through, I'll show you around." We definitely disappeared for the few minutes they spoke to each other. The changes Javius had gone through since attending Williamstead Martin didn't seem to faze Aniyah. Whether she thought it was a phase or something more permanent or simply didn't care, it was difficult to tell by her demeanor. Maybe in a joke about how he spoke or dressed, but nothing that suggested more than a passive observation. It was like she saw that guy back in freshman year who struggled with consumer behaviors and how they both used to use their friends to illustrate different purchase personas so they could understand how specific actions at scale could affect the market. She saw her friend, and on the face of it, the seeing him again, at that moment, that was what was most important. After she rejoined her group, we all looked at Javius like, "Yo, you good?" He assured us that he was, and that it was nice seeing her. None of us were going for it, but as good friends, we let it go. Well, most of us let it go. SJ could never really keep his mouth shut, and the moment Aniyah and Javius broke off to talk, he couldn't shut up about how good she looked in hushed tones. And the moment Javius came back to the table, he asked if Javius was going to do anything about it being making a move, a pursuit. But because it's SJ, he didn't intend the wholesome variety. Javius didn't even dignify SJ with an answer, but that didn't keep SJ from making intimations of his own. The rest of us knew SJ wasn't wrong, which is still a far cry from him being right. Aniyah looked good, smelled good, was doing good, and by every other normal standard, that would be enough to warrant at least the thought of a pursuit. But this wasn't a normal circumstance. She was his unrequited love, his Roman Empire, or at least she had been, and feelings like that just don't disappear. So SJ was right. She was absolutely worth the pursuit, just not by Javius. In the days leading up to his first date with Lady Sinai, Javius had more than enough time to think, which is never a good idea in these situations. Not only did Javius consider the pursuit, he lost his mind over it. "I have to break my involvement with Miss Sinai," Javius said to Travian as they met for coffee 2 days later. Travian asked why. He was the only one of us who truly understood what involvement meant. For the rest of us, they were simply talking, hey, what's up, how are you, want to go out, light stuff. But apparently, it was much deeper than that. Javius intended to visit Charlotte to declare his intentions for courtship should their first meeting go well. Like, this was a big deal. It was real life Bridgerton, but in the States with modern wardrobes, well, mostly. Because Javius and Sinai had officially met at the gala and begun correspondence, it was like an exclusive thing. Javius wasn't talking to anyone else, and neither was Sinai. They were locked in on one another. And courtship was the next thing. It was basically assumed at this point. Of course, the first meeting would go well, and not so long after, an engagement would easily follow, with a wedding on fast approach. Now, there were multiple red flags with that by normal standards. The speed, the certainty, the rigidity. But by far, the biggest red flag was Javius taking what was nearly a certain thing with Miss Sinai to take a chance on Aniyah. At the very least, we wanted him to find a surer footing with her, to at least know if she'd be interested. But apparently, according to his words, that would be dishonorable, especially since arrangements have already been made for his arrival at the Tucson house. The timing on this was bad, but more so was Javius's approach. For any other guy, this would be a phone call. For some, a quick one, but not Javius. Listen, I wanted Javius to follow his heart, but the logic didn't make sense. I could respect the difficulty of his situation, but in this instance, it really wasn't that difficult at all. And let me tell you something, I did my research on Miss Aniyah Tucson. We're talking about someone whom I would happily go behind my man's back for her hand. She was that girl. Sweet, Southern, went to the right schools, was about to start the right career, who enjoyed ruminating over a Basquiat with a cheap glass of wine. A rarity. She, like Javius, had the air of propriety and clearly shared most of the same values, but that was just the tip of the iceberg of who she was. This was the type of woman who makes the man as much as the capable man could make her. A partner. When we were at the Williamsted Martin graduation, the dean mentioned during his speech to the graduates the importance of family, that a man is truly at his best and most capable at the service of his family. The dean made it sound like when the men find wives, only then has their journey of becoming men of renown, men of stature, men of reputation really begun. So Travian asked Javius a series of questions to help him understand the gravity of his situation. Who else have you sought counsel from? Why the change of heart? Are you sure? What's the plan? How well do you know Aniyah? Can you confidently state that your pursuit would be welcomed? And more. Even without all the answers, Javius had made up his mind, and Travian, with several reservations stated, confirmed that the honorable action would be to go to Charlotte and rescind his intent and pursuance for Miss Aniyah's affections. Javius, this is not an action that can be undone. This will be noted. Many other doors will be closed. Though Miss Aniyah would never spurn you publicly, others will take this action as a question of your word. Even if it never made it to the engagement, we all saw you that night at the gala. It may as well have been. This is what Travian told Javius before they left the cafe. What Javius failed to share, or kept really close to himself, was the nature of his relationship with Miss Aniyah. What we understood as correspondence started because of how they stole the show that night at the gala. The way that they danced with each other, from what I later learned, was described as moving. Many assumed that they were a perfect match, that even after the dance was done, there was no one else left in the world but those two. Respectfully, of course, but more than an introduction or a soiree, what they shared was intimate. And now he was going to throw it all away. A few days later, a day before he was supposed to arrive, Javius took a long, deep breath before knocking on the door of the Tucson home in Charlotte, North Carolina. Where his early arrival was first perceived as an indication of his excitement, it quickly turned sour. Let me set the scene for you. It wasn't a dour day painted with dark, gloomy clouds and the pitter-patter of rain to reflect the conditions of the heart. In fact, it was a gorgeous day in Charlotte. The sun shone brightly, wisps of cloud carried on lazily in the sky. The rustling of leaves outside the Tucson home could be seen and heard from their living room, where Javius sat waiting on Aniyah's father. A breeze came through the windows, moving around the scents of Lysol and freshly baked cookies. The Victorian facade updated to a more contemporary style, but you could still find the signature of the original moldings from place to place. Where Miss Aniyah was every bit the girl next door the evening of their first meeting, that day, she was the epitome of home. Though now only clad in jeans and a Vanderbilt t-shirt instead of a ball gown, her elegance was undiminished. I often question whether Javius's resolve faltered in the presence of what he was so foolishly deciding to let go of. If thoughts of how casually Aniyah prepared a summer spritz, a lavender lemonade with a hint of brown sugar, as she spoke of her new fintech role, grabbed him. If the notes of vanilla, cocoa, and orange blossoms that wrapped around her while she moved around, not anticipating to host until the following day, sparked some sort of lingering sense, or the striking resemblance that she shared with her mother, as both of them radiated a cashmere warmth and affability that was hard not to smile at despite the hardness of the truth to be shared. I wondered, for the split second where his thoughts were ungentlemanly, as his eyes lingered shortly on the contour of her neck from jaw to collarbone, when she sat down adjacent to him. If then he realized the madness of his decision, the forfeiture of the vision that was clearer than day. Once Aniyah's father joined them in the living room after wrapping a call, Javius could finally share what had been caught in his chest since landing. Mr. and Mrs. Toussaint, Javius cleared his throat. I'm grateful you have welcomed me into your home despite my early arrival. I wish I had arrived with better news, but with my gratitude, I must also share my deepest regret. The pleasure of knowing your daughter. Javius turned to look at Sanai, her face questioning at the word regret. Sanai, his eyes faltered to find hers for a moment. These past few months, I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know your brilliant mind and honest sensibilities. Your letters were truly inspired. But to know your heart and virtue, I must be honest and virtuous and kind. I cannot continue in my intent for your hand. I sincerely apologize for the discontent this will cause. Where there was a flash of pain in her eyes, it was now locked behind a practiced poise. She didn't feign a smile. The warmth Javius felt since coming into her home now retreating in a cold shrewdness. I'm grateful for your honesty, Javius. I am taken aback by it, but I appreciate that you've shared it. And though I know your honor required you to deliver this news in person, I assure you the journey was not necessary, as the same correspondence we've shared so far would have most certainly sufficed. Sanai's words were measured and even. If there was a love there before, there was no evidence of it. Javius, Sanai's mom spoke gently. Are you sure this is something that you want to do? Is your mind made up? Her tenderness, meant to soften the severity of the question, hit Javius harder than if she were to simply throw him out of her home. Javius teetered unsteadily. The question filled the room. For all the things he had learned about staying true to one's word, about honor, valor, discipline, and the confidence that was a symptom of carefully embracing each, he never fully appreciated what holding on to those things would feel like when making one of the most difficult decisions in his life. But Sanai's mother gave him an opportunity, a way out, which only made things worse in Javius's mind. Being in front of Sanai, hearing the music of her laughter, the wittiness of her banter, the softness of her entirety, it was enough to weaken resolve, to reduce any previous affections held for another to barely a memory. Even her lack of interjection was a sign that perhaps, he had not lost it all, that it could be salvaged, it could be regained. Javius took a deep breath, looked at Sanai, and then at her mother. It is. And with those two words, Javius removed all hope. Javius, Sanai's dad, rose to his feet. I will see you out. There may or may not have been more words. These are people of propriety with rules of conduct, where others may have had a long conversation about what had changed, especially in front of the parents of the person you were seeking after. Javius's word was enough. What more needed to be said? Javius had concluded his intention with Miss Sanai Toussaint and was now free to pursue Aniyah Sinclaire. But will the reward outweigh the cost? All right, that was episode 3 of the Gentleman's Academy. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, subscribe, enable notifications, or follow the show on the podcast app of your choice to catch the next episode. Until next time, take care.